This is the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show, and today I'm pleased to have the man, the myth, the legendary bass player for Public Image, Jah Wobble. How you doing today, Jah?
I'm good, Eric. I did leave Public Image in 1980, which is a little while ago. But they've not been any good since then, of course. I'm just saying that. I'm only joking, by the way.
No, I know. I know you are. You have a good sense of humor. Meeting John Lydon and John Simon Ritchie, also known as Sid Vicious, at Kingsway College. Tell me about that.
John, first of all, I remember he was the top of the hallway looking over the canteen, and I met him, and I might have took the mickey out of him or something. I was like, there was a few hippies there. It was it was a funny place. A lot of people went there. It was College of Further Education. Kids who'd been kicked out of school. It was near a mainline station, so like in New York, Penn Station is, back in the day, 8th Avenue and all that. I loved it because that's what I liked. And tatty old sleazy areas with cheap bars, drinkers bars, that kind of thing. And because it was North London, you had a few middle class kids and a few hippie things. So I took the mickey out of it. I laughed at it and made fun of it, but I loved it. I was intrigued with it as well. And I think he was older than me, John, when I met him. And I had a Tottenham scarf. I'm a Tottenham fan. And he's an Arsenal fan. And he went, the first thing he said, no, not a Tottenham fan. And I said, no, not an Arsenal fan. But we become friends. John Beverley, he'd left Hackney College. And then John Beverley, Sid, came over just to be with him. He was so attached to John. He couldn't stay at Hackney College, which was just up the road. Really wasn't that far away. He had to come to Kingsway to be with him. And that was like a year later. And then that was 75-ish. John disappeared for a few weeks. Sid's left. I'm second best choice, really. He's got to hang about with me. He was seeing a psychiatrist at that time. So the psychiatrist wanted me to go in with him. He shrink because he told the psychiatrist he didn't feel he had anything to live for. He was going through a lot because he'd introduced John to the scene at McLaren shop. So he was there, and John got the gig that was supposed to be Sid's gig, really, which was singing with the Sex Pistols, right? So he's ended up hanging around me in King's Cross. I was on my way out, really, with the college. I wasn't sticking with the course. I was supposed to redo my O-levels, and I was somewhere else with it all, wanting to run around having fun and, and all that stuff. And so anyway, he asked me to go and see, the psychiatrist asked to see me as well with him. And the name of the game was the psychiatrist is going to say to me to get on his side to help Sid to feel positive about life and that life was worth living. So he said to me, John, you've got to convince him I hear you've got interests. You play football, you've got a girlfriend, and you go to the movies and you do stuff, don't you? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, Sid hasn't got a girlfriend. He doesn't do anything. He says life's hopeless and he has nothing to live for. And John, we have to, because I wasn't called Jah Wobble at the time. Sid wasn't called Sid at the time. So he said to me, John, said the psychiatrist, he was a proper shrink, big bald head than I've got now, with kind of big beard, a black kind of beard, and kind of Hampstead kind of individual, you'd think of him, and he kind of guy you would have got round the village or something in New York back in the day, would have been in the Leonard Cohen probably and all that. Anyway, he said to me, John, we have to convince John life's worth living. What do you think? And I said, I'm sorry. Obviously, this was a setup. I said, I'm really sorry, but I don't know if John does have anything to live for. I really don't. And Sid turned to him with a triumphant kind of look. Yeah, I told you. Even my friend thinks my life is worthless and there's no hope for me. Of course, it was a setup between the two of us. We'd worked it out. So the guy was very upset. He was really shocked. He couldn't speak, and he really tried to convince me. And I said, I'd like to help you, but I don't know if John has anything to offer life. I really don't. And I'm sorry. I just can't see any positives to him. I think he's a really bad person. And he probably said something, well, why'd you hang about with him? And I said, well, that's going to end today. He's not my mate anymore. You've made me realise how worthless he is. Whatever rubbish we come out with. Yeah. So we left there poker-faced, and when we went round the corner, and then we were laughing and joking about it. But actually, it's just funny, but we obviously later I reflected on it and thought, actually, as we say here, many a true word said in jest. You know, he meant it, actually. Obviously, I didn't know that at the time, but he meant it. You know, part of him meant he was going to kill himself, you know, already at that time, you know.
Was Sid doing drugs at that point?
Yes. Yeah, he was, yeah. Speed. And remember going up to his gaff. He lived with his mum and went up there. Wasn't very homely at all. She was banging up. I didn't think he was banging up smack at the time, but maybe he was. I don't think he was. I think he was banging Speed up. She was obviously doing heroin. I'm 16 and I was like, oh dear, this isn't, you know, I can't remember exactly, but I wanted to get out of there. I didn't want to stay there, you know. I got out of there. I might have snorted bit of speed myself, can't even remember actually. What I remember was wanting to get out of there. So I got, you know, I went off and, you know, looking, it was quite bleak really. And I remember, you know, something affects you. There was a feeling of bleakness from it, you know, so I remember that. So it was quite, you know, it was very, I did a radio documentary called In Search of Sid by those, and it was a documentary I got in everybody who knew him. And I found out a lot about him in retrospect. I didn't know at the time. He used to speak when I met him with a slight like that, very, very slight accent, which is a Bristolian accent because he'd spent time in Bristol. He was born in London and he went to primary school right at Piccadilly Circus, can you believe it? Which is quite unusual. Lived in the old Covent Garden when it was still a market area. It was very run down by then in the 70s. The mum had left there, it must have been the early 70s, I suppose, gone to Ibiza, apparently, Tunbridge Wells, and then to Bristol. And he was known as John, but he was also, I think, Simon. He was known as Simon Beverly for a while. So there's all these weird things with his identity. John Ritchie, Simon Beverly, for some reason. He's in Bristol, then he comes to London, to Hackney, and it's quite rough. It's a rough neighbourhood, and you speak with this funny old, like, you know, you're from Bristol and you got a bit of a voice like that, like, you know. And so he got picked on. Some mates of mine, I didn't even know that they knew him from the neighbourhood, but they did. Terry, Vince, well, I knew Vince knew him. I didn't know that Terry knew him. Terry actually put him up for a while. When his mum kicked him out of that flat, he went and stayed with Terry in Mile End. So it was Billy Dolan, Vince Bracken and Terry Penton. And those three are the main voices on this thing, but also Viv Albertine's on there, you know. She's got a lot, she's still got a lot of time for him, you know. But they talk a lot about how he was. He'd come from Bristol, was getting picked on. They stood up for him, but he would dress as Ziggy Stardust completely. He started to learn to fight back and would really fight. And Terry said he was very game and all that. And it's a snapshot of London at that time as well. It's very full of character, you know. And as Terry was some good friends had looked after him. And on the documentary, John Savage, the writer of England's Dreaming, who's a good friend of mine, gave me access to his archive. So I got a recording of his mum talking about when she kicked him out of the flat, saying, you know, I told him to sling his up. He said, but Mum, where will I go? And I said, I don't bloody care. Get out. So, you know, I don't care if you got to sleep on a park bench. I think she was originally from the East Midlands, so she had a little bit of an accent. You know, there's many accents. You go 3 miles up the road in Britain, you got a different accent. So she had a slightly different accent, you know. So they're quite a tough lot. And as Terry said, he started to become a bit antisocial, a bit, you know, pushed his luck a bit with people. And they were at a party and he started really getting into a mate of Terry's. And then Terry clashed with him. And as Terry said, he picked up the nearest thing at hand, which was a meat fork, and thrust it in his neck. And he didn't, there was no real damage done. It was a meat fork and it, you know, it was a fight. And as Terry said, you know, we were still mates, but our relationship was never the same. Yeah.
What would you say was the kindest thing that Sid ever did for you?
God, It's a very good question. I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to answer that easily. Nothing comes to mind, to be honest. If you said it with Lydon, with Johnny Rotten, I'd say, well, he got me in P.I.L.
Yeah.
You know, he asked me to join him in a band, and that kind of set me up, and that was great. And I can remember when he was at his you know, just when he was just taking a day off from being some kind of a figure, even before he kind of made it, when he would take a lot of time out, and he was just a regular geezer. He'd make you a cup of tea. So when we were living in a squat together, he'd make you a cup of tea. Do you want a cup of tea? Yeah, go on, I'll have a cup of tea. You know what I mean? So he was just a regular guy, and you could think, yeah, he made me cups of tea sometimes. You know, I would have made him a cup of tea. So it was a bit of normal human kindness. I got in P.I.L. with Sid. I'd have to rack my mind. I couldn't really think of anything nice, to be quite honest. He gave me my name. Maybe that was a kind thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Jah Wobble.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of counts.
Is it true that you, John Lydon, Sid Vicious, and John Gray lived in a squat together?
We would have been in squats together. It was all a bit chaotic at that time. I do remember my friend Ronnie Britton got hold of a house in Edmonton. It was a haunted house, and that kind of became a squat. And John asked me if he could move in there, and he did, because I think he'd been kicked out of his gaff with his mum and dad, so he ended up there. I don't remember staying in any squat with Sid for too long, because Sid irritated me. We'd argue a bit in a friendly way about playing bass. He was into the Ramones, I was into sort of dub and half-time sort of bass lines. But Sid was annoying. He was an annoying person to have around too much. So you wouldn't want to. He'd irritate everybody, I think. So you wouldn't want to be around him too much in a squat, from my point of view.
What?
Because he'd annoy you. He'd probably drink all the milk or something. That kind of thing.
The Blairing Out Show.